I'm sure many people in the room are familiar with the statistic. 70% of workers on the Battersea Nine Elms site are from overseas. So with Brexit looming, I feel like I've mentioned Brexit every session today, so I apologise for that. The industry is potentially looking at a really serious skills crunch. So in this session, we're going to debate how that should be addressed and whether specifically off-site construction is the answer. Or does investment in traditional construction skills remain cheaper than so-called modern methods of construction? I won't say any more because we've got a fantastic panel to do all the talking for the next hour or so. So let me introduce Paul Westbury, who's Group Technical Director of the multinational construction company Laing O'Rourke. Lynn Sullivan, who's a member of the Green Construction Board and the GCB Knowledge and Skills Group, and she's also an architect at LSA Studio. Simon Sturgis is Managing Director of Sturgis Carbon Profiling and the new chair of the REBA Sustainable Futures Group. Lucy Homer is Head of Design at the property and construction giant Lendlease, and Alan Shingler is a partner at the architects Shepherd Robson. So, as with the previous sessions today, I'm going to ask each of the panelists to set out what they've got to say, what they think for a few minutes, and then we'll have a debate and bring as many questions in as possible. There will be roving mics. So let me please welcome Paul Westbury.
Afternoon, everybody. I hope you can hear me because it's a bit of a din out there. Let's hope we don't have too much noise up here. There we go, there's me, enough of that. I thought rather mischievously we could have a go by looking at one of these things. An iPhone. It is actually the last generation iPhone, so I'm a bit out of date already. Kind of important for all of us. We've probably got one of these things in our pockets. And I thought it's always interesting to see what happens when you smash it with a hammer. And I know that makes you all feel very nervous, just the thought of it. But if you smash your iPhone with a hammer and you add up the cost of all the bits that sit within it, and you have a look at how much R&D and software is added into that, then you can see that it costs about $225 to make an iPhone. And the US retail price about $650. That's not a bad business model. And if you look at that business model in nice simple terms, there you go, $650 to sell it, $225 to make it with a bit of R&D, which gives you a 65% profit margin, which is, of course, why Apple is one of the wealthiest wealthiest countries. There we go, there's a slip. Wealthier than the country at one point. One of the wealthiest companies in the world, if not the wealthiest. So I thought it might be quite interesting to set the scene for the challenges that the construction industry faces by looking at what happens if the construction industry were to make an iPhone. Suspend disbelief for the moment. First problem is that the construction industry would sell the same iPhone for $350 because the construction industry cannot articulate the value of what it does. The second problem is that the construction industry would try and pour the iPhone between two sheets of plywood in the house of the person that wanted the iPhone, and as a result it would cost about $346 to make it. There's absolutely no room for any R&D because you're desperately keen to hang on to your $4 of profit, which is 1%. And I think it'd be fair to say that those two statistics together represent the challenge that the construction industry has in breaking the mold and moving forward. But joking aside, given the additional headwinds that we know we're going to have to face, Construction 2025, the government's new targets for what it wants construction to achieve, first thing in there, cost reduction. I can't see where that's coming from with this model. Second thing that Kathy mentioned, skills shortage. So how on earth are we going to manage that? The construction sector delivers the most incredible projects that enables UK PLC to operate, enables society to work. But the model that we currently use is completely broken. Completely broken. It simply cannot respond to what the future needs. So, very simply put, here are three key things that I'm hugely passionate about in driving change into the construction industry to deal with that serious flaw in the business model for the construction industry. Off-site manufacturing and design for off-site manufacturing to be driven into the heart of everything that we do. Moving into the digital world, where we're taking automotive and aerospace, PLM, product lifecycle management tools, and driving true end-to-end integration in the digital space to prototype what we do before we construct, and looking at delivery partnerships as a new way in which we procure projects. So enough of this design in an agnostic way, cheapest price wins down the end. You get everybody at the table at the beginning. You put these three things into the mix, and I can absolutely guarantee that you get revolutionized results. We know because we've been doing it for a while. It's not as commonplace as we'd like. We'd like a few more competitors, and I'll be happy to talk to you a bit more a little later about how we do it. But if you take 70% of a project and you manufacture it off-site, which is pretty typical for us for a building project, you can take 60% of the on-site labor away, and you can reduce your program by around about a third. That means you can drive higher quality solutions with fewer people in a much better environment with manufacturing quality right at the heart of what you're up to, and you can deliver it faster. And that's what we do. So the future of construction is not off-site manufacturing. Construction today is all about off-site manufacturing, as well as a few other things. And I look forward to talking to you some more about it in a minute. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Paul. I just wanted to zoom in on one thing, which is the quality. I mean, the numbers all looked great there, but how can you ensure that the quality is higher for off-site manufacturing?
I think you just have to go and have a look at a manufacturing environment to see that the conditions that people work in a factory, a modern factory, this is about advanced manufacturing, allow you to have significantly improved quality control, significantly improved focus, significantly improved technical skills wrapped around the component that you're working on. You've got repetition so that you can have no faults forward and lots of repeat learning. But perhaps in a really rudimentary way, you're not building the things in the freezing rain or atrocious weather or in the dark. So you get improved conditions, and it's safer as well for people. So I think quality is an imperative. If you try and go onto a construction site today in inclement weather and try and deliver a high-quality product, it remains tremendously hard.
Great. Well, I'd be really interested to hear whether the rest of the panel agree with you wholeheartedly or not. Lynn Sullivan.
So, thank you, Kathy. Well, in my view, it's not an either-or situation. I mean, clearly we do have a major skills issue, and we need to change things to get better build quality. And also to generate more employment opportunities, because we've got this agenda for 1 million homes by 2020, not least. I think I've been doing some work with Green Construction Board on producing a skills primer. So I actually think we need a baseline better skill set that can be applied in all sorts of different areas. And we've produced this sustainable building training guide, which is basically a primer for all the actors in the construction process to talk better about quality. So I think we need to invest in the traditional construction skills. We have an aging construction workforce. We don't have the skills that we need, and hopefully this thing I've just been working with others to produce will help with that. The technical education that's rumoured to be announced tomorrow in the budget might help a little bit too. But there's been for a very long time, I remember giving evidence to a House of Lords committee about 15 years ago, and they were all saying, how can we get the best and the brightest into construction? And actually, there are some things about the off-site agenda, which Paul's alluded to, which make it potentially much more attractive to bring, to develop better skills and bring new entrants into construction, not least, the health and the healthy working environment, but also the range of skills that you need for offsite. So it's the logistics as well as the quality control and the site assembly and just the whole thing. So there are some very interesting things about offsite, and actually the CITB have just done some research which is about to be published on what the skills shortage issues mean, particularly in the offsite context. And they have found that actually there's very little specifically related to offsite. So there's clearly something that needs to be done there. and watch out for that research. I personally am very interested in off-site production, and yeah, you're right. It's actually a lot of us have been doing it for some time now. There's the panacea is modular homes, but actually there's a lot of off-site and panelized and podized that's been going on for years. So it's not a completely new thing. I'll come back, if I may, to the critical thing, which is who does the investment in the factory. But yeah, from my perspective, better build quality is absolutely key. All the work that I and others have been doing on the performance gap says, generally speaking, and all the stuff in the press about defects in new buildings has highlighted this. We do not build the right level of quality. And the Zero Carbon Hub work on performance gap showed that. There's a lack of rigor on site inspection, and there's a lack of verification of completed work and so on. And obviously, when you're going into mass production, you have to iron out every little detail. And so, we need to particularly wise up on that front. So my work with my company, Sustainable by Design, we were doing an off-site renovation to passive house standard in Thamesmead, which completed last year. And we actually got a German contractor to do it, and everyone said, well, why did it have to be a German contractor? But the fact of the matter was that first of all, they were used to doing off-site, overclad, enveloping, in fact, to passive house standard. And there was no one else in this country who had that skill. They also happened to be a timber frame specialist who'd invested in production in Bavaria, but who also acted as main contractor. That's quite unusual if you compare it to the UK market. So we were asked kind of what's the best option, and so I think one of the key issues to get it firing on all cylinders, that is quality and skills, is that you have to look at what mechanisms are needed to actually operationalize, the investment that's needed in off-site big time. Because at the moment, most developers are not constructors. They tend to be management contractors and hire subcontract workforce. So, obviously new entrants to the market like Legal and General and people like Crest and others who are now saying they want to run their own factories. That's a real change in culture. So I think that aspect of procurement, there need to be big changes to replicate the kind of system that's going to produce the amount of high quality buildings that we need. And kind of last but not least, I would say it's from the sort of architectural perspective. One of the things about our country is that we always, tend to contextualize things, and the planning system is what it is. And I think there's a challenge for designers to actually demonstrate that off-site production and indeed modular buildings can actually deliver the kind of quality in terms of the finished product that's not only going to perform well, but it's also going to look good, and people are going to, love it. Because I think that's potentially a barrier at the moment.
Thanks very much. Just picking up on that final point, really. You've said it's important to have both off-site and traditional, but I suppose what I'm not quite clear on from what you've just said is what really the limits of off-site are. You've both seemed to be extolling the virtues. What's the problem with just going all the way down that route?
Well, it's people have to invest in factories and do the sort of R&D that Laing O'Rourke have been doing for donkey's years. It doesn't happen overnight.
You haven't got the scale enough.
So you haven't got the scale, and the actors, if you like, aren't the right actors who are going to make that investment at the moment. That's not to say that can't change.
Well, that's what in the future, 20 years, we've been talking about the future in the last session.
Yeah.
20 years' time, do you think it will all be off-site?
Well, then you'll have, a stack of pattern books, and you can choose between your Barretts and your Crests and your Laing O'Rourkes, and say, well, I don't fancy that, but I do fancy this. But where at the moment, as I say, we haven't really got that reassurance that the interest and the quality, visually as well as in performance terms, is happening through off-site.
So a small note of scepticism.
Yeah.
Simon Sturgis.
My interest in off-site fabrication is really to do with creating a low-carbon, resource-efficient built environment. And I guess that this all starts with the materials and what is the content of what we're making, and ultimately where does it go? And I'll come on to both of those things. So I'm interested also in the life cycle of the components and systems that are being made into buildings, and also what the future use of these things is once the building no longer has a economic life. What do you do with those things? And of course, if you're going to have a future life, then it is about quality, and we've already heard about offsite fabrication and the word quality being next to each other. And I think, in my view, the technology is still in its infancy. I know that Lang O'Rourke and, of course, Legal & General have been mentioned, and there are others like SOM are looking at this sort of thing from a sort of very specifically sustainable and low-carbon viewpoint, which is bringing a lot of timber into prefabrication and off-site construction. But of course, what I'm also think is interesting about this is that and a lot has been said already about quality, but I think it's to do with the precision with which things can go together, the detailing, and also things like the lack of, or the control of waste. You may have waste, but at least it's in the place where you've created it, and it doesn't have to be driven around to other places. So it is there to potentially be reused. And I think all of that, and of course it's in controlled conditions. So you've got the optimum situation where you can actually use your resources to the best, and you can actually be very precise about the amount of resources. Typically site work involves a degree of, if you like, there's a sort of extra factor, if you like, brought in to allow for things that are likely to be inefficient and so on. So I think that's very important. I think also on-site, off-site fabrication, when you assemble buildings, reduces the need to rectify errors on site because, of course, you know what the things, it's already been checked in factories and so on. But I think there's also an opportunity, and that is, as I sort of hinted earlier, that if you're assembling buildings out of components and elements that are fabricated off-site, there is a potential to disassemble them if they're intelligently put together, disassemble them for reuse. And I think that is quite an important concept going forward, because in the sort of world we live in, which is very much a linear economy, which is we make things, we use them, we throw them away. If you can make things, use them, and then reuse them again, then of course it avoids the throwing away, it also avoids the starting off. But that ability to reuse suggests a level of quality, as has been already said. But I think also what's important is that the things that are made should not be inflexible. I think the off-site fabrication should major on the benefits, but enable disassembly and enable things to be taken apart into components. I mean, I can think of a very pointy building on the South Bank which has unitized cladding systems. Well, you can't replace the south facade if it fails earlier than the rest. The whole lot has to come off. So there's no flexibility there. But if you take the tower at Canary Wharf, for example, individual windows can be replaced. So both of those are off-site fabrication, but it's a question of how you do it. So I think there is also, I would say, you've got to be aware of things like composite materials, where things are bonded together. That inhibits recycling. So it is about how you put these things together and how you can disassemble them. And it is about a future life. And I would say also that somebody would have heard the term circular economy. I suppose it's a rebranding of recycling, but in essence, that's kind of what we're talking about here. And you've already heard about Legal & General and Lang O'Rourke and others, but we're trying to put this, my company, Sturgis Carbon Profiling, we're trying to put this into practice at Gatwick Airport. I'm talking tomorrow a bit about that, but the idea is to really, as Gatwick grows, is to turn all these buildings to ones that can be reused, and off-site fabrication will be fundamental to that.
I mean, I suppose, just picking up on the greenness of it, I was thinking about Lynn's point about craning the panels in from Germany. I mean, that's not very carbon efficient, is it?
Well, I think it's
they could have been made in England.
Yeah.
I think it's not necessarily the case. It depends on what is available everywhere. And I think it's very easy to make a kind of a simplistic decision. For example, if those panels in Germany came by boat from North Germany and arrived at Southampton and were transported to a site very close, actually that's very good. If it's transported by lorry across Europe, that's not so good at all. But even in those terms, it's a small part of the overall potential benefits of a well prefabricated system.
Lucy Homer.
Hi. So actually, I'm going to agree with Lynn. So I think there's a sort of traditional construction here, and there's then sort of full DFMA at the other scale. And Lend-Lease as a company works across that range. So I think along that scale, each element has a different issue. So if you talk about traditional construction, if you look at one of our sites, Elephant Park, that's actually about how do you bring in traditional construction skills. So 30% of our workforce at Elephant Park has come from the local community. We've trained those people through our non-profit organisation Be On Site. And so we're giving back to the community, but also we're teaching traditional construction skills. The majority of our projects have some element of prefabrication. And I get very cross when we talk about modern methods of construction. Let's not forget that actually prefab has been around since the war. And I sort of have that argument in the office all the time. It's really not a modern method of construction. But just picking up on your point in terms of waste, what we've done at IQL, the International Quarter in Stratford, is we've taken that sort of waste to another level where we've got chill beams that come in, they're prefabricated elements, and they're fully commissioned. They literally just, and I've watched it, within 5 minutes they just go onto the ceiling and they're fully installed. But what we've done is we've taken the packaging, we've taken the crate that chill beam arrives in from the factory. That crate is then disassembled and it then gets sent back to the factory and is then recycled. So it's that reduction in construction waste is huge. When I talk about it's no different to milk bottles. All you're doing is recycling, you're reusing, and that goes all the way through the life cycle of the project. And for us, at somewhere like IQL, because we're using the same kit of parts all the way through those buildings, we'll be able to reuse those elements all the way through. Then I was going to talk about what I consider truly modular buildings. So we're just in the process of finishing Europe's largest super prison up just outside Liverpool. And there we've used prefabricated concrete elements that come in and they literally bolt together. And then at the other scale, so right at the end, this is true DFMA, is our SLAM project for MOJ, where over 12 years, and again, this is it's nothing new, we created 22,000 bed spaces, and they were basically bedrooms that got slotted into single living accommodation for the army. And there you had a bedroom that arrived and was then literally just dropped onto site off the back of a factory. So I think there's a range, and I think it depends on where you sit on that range. I think the closer you get to true DFMA, I think there are two blockers. I think they've sort of been touched on already. One is the supply chain we use, and I think we perhaps talk about that some more. And I think the other one, which I think Alan might pick up on in a minute, is design. So if you're not designing for modularisation or volumetric right from the start of the process, then you've almost got to stop and redesign. And so that requires client buy-in. It requires the designer's buy-in. And I suppose that's I think actually where we can make the biggest difference. But until you get the designers working in that way, actually there's no hope, because the construction guys are actually just picking it up right at the end of the process.
Thank you very much. That was great. You mentioned that prefab has been around since the war, obviously. Are we going to look back in years to come at the kind of MMC that we're doing now and think, yeah, it's a bit rubbish, we have to pull it all down, as we have done with a lot of the prefab? Is there a tangible difference?
So I think there's still a stigma surrounding prefab in that way. And if I sort of took my corporate hat off and talked about, that does make me nervous. I think just coming on the DLR today, you can see some of the examples of that around you, which is why I think a company like Lend-Lease will actually, we might end up a sort of halfway house. So I think, again, picking up on your point, it might be more about using smarter materials. So we've now constructed almost 200 units in CLT in the UK. So that's cross-laminated timber, which is has a 50% reduction on embodied carbon to concrete. It's 30% faster on site, and we have sort of a lot less deliveries on site as well. So I think it's about working with those sort of materials which can give you the sort of architectural expression fitting into a place such as Elephant Park, but also is using some of the different new materials that are available today.
Great. Alan Shingler, last but not least, and I think, you've got some slides, haven't you? So
Yeah, I'm not running
pick
off.
your way to the podium.
I'm just taking the fastest, safest,
Great.
energy-saving route to the
And then I think, because we are
podium.
running a little bit late, I think we'll open it out to the audience straight away. I'm just to ask you one question that the rest of the panel can pick up on.
So I have got some slides, and I thought I would approach this from the enthusiastic eyes of a designer, as an architect, somebody who's passionate about modern methods of construction, who's passionate about design, and passionate about sustainability and all the advantages that that can bring. But in doing that, I couldn't help but look back. It's already been mentioned that prefabrication has been around since the post-war. 1919 was the Help the Heroes campaign after the First World War. After the Second World War, Churchill released a target to produce 500,000 new prefabricated homes. 500,000 prefabricated homes over 10 years. They actually built 1.2 million homes in 6 years, but only 157,000 of those were prefabricated, so a long way off the target, even with the Second World War post-housing need. And then more recently, from the Second World War right through to Latham is almost 50 years before there was initiatives that were proposed through government. So in 1994, we had Michael Latham's report. Off the back of that, very quickly, we had 1998, we had John Egan's Rethinking Construction. 2006, we had John Prescott's Design for Manufacture competition. And now, most recently, we've had the Farmer Review. So from all of those initiatives, there is definitely a desire. There is definitely a need for housing there's definitely a housing shortage, and a possibility, isn't there surely, to use modern methods of construction to try and address that housing shortage. So, what are the hurdles? And I just wanted to mention two. The first is procurement, and I'm looking at this from my perspective as an architect. Cost, value, flexibility. The way that buildings are now procured would prioritize, in my view, cost and flexibility. Because ultimately, you want to enable as much flexibility in tender so that you can get the best cost. We're not going to benefit, or value is very little, or very often sort of ignored within that equation. So we procure things to give as much flexibility in the design to allow flexibility of which product you'll use at a later date.
Oops.
The second hurdle, specifically around homes, is the equation here being cost, time, and sales. And in this perspective, I feel that cost and sales are the driver. Now, I'm looking at private housing here, so time is actually often used to either speed up or slow down the delivery of those houses to be able to control the sales prices. So there isn't always an advantage to build things quicker. Going back from a design perspective, prefabricated construction and the ideas of prefabrication and what that can do in design is nothing new, as we've already heard. Shepherd Robson's Jigwood bungalow was built from pre-stressed plywood from the aircraft industry at the time to address a housing need in 1944. Buckminster Fuller's Jigwood house, or Jicate house, sorry. But then more recently, the images that you've seen around modern methods of construction or prefabrication tend to be bespoke. They tend to sort of expose that aesthetic, that architectural language. But my belief is that prefabrication is a process and not an aesthetic.
Yeah.
It's actually a process that we should be using to improve efficiency, to save waste, but it can still be beautiful buildings and doesn't have to be expressed in the architecture. This was a building which we did now 10 years ago. It was actually the UK's first level 6 home. It's constructed using modern methods of construction, so it's a very, very sustainable, self-sufficient home using modern methods of construction. But it has a curved roof. That was intentional. We wanted the building to express itself in an architectural way that addressed its context, not its construction methodology. The last project, a more recent project, is a building we just completed above Tower Bridge Station, which is a full modular construction. That's been used as the building blocks for the building itself, for the construction of the building itself. But it sits in a World Heritage Site. It has to address its immediate context. It has to have architectural beauty that respects its location. So in summary, I believe that speeding up delivery for housing, modern methods can do that. There's a great opportunity to do that. I think that there is an opportunity for it to help address skill shortage, especially around potentially Brexit, as I'm sure we've heard mentioned previously. It can improve quality. It can actually improve design, provided there's an ambition there, but only if we address and are realistic about the hurdles which we face, both in the procurement strategy which we currently work within, and the cost and time equation. Thank you.
Thanks very much. I was interested, just want to pick up on a couple of your slides there. You had a hut of some sort, a yoga retreat, a school canteen, all quite small-scale utilitarian. And then you've got Tower Bridge Station, so a much larger scale project. But is it still the case, do you think, now, that the really high-end quality architecture, or projects at least, are going to be traditional construction?
No.
No. Why would you ask that?
Well, no, it's just a lot of the projects on the slides were quite small scale.
Those are the examples of images where I feel the industry hasn't embraced the benefits of modern methods of construction. Maybe I didn't make that very clear.
I see. Sorry, well, maybe
these were bespoke projects where the architect or the client had chosen to express the aesthetic of modern methods. Whereas I'm an advocate of saying that it's a process of construction, not an aesthetic, and it can be applied to many different solutions, provided you deal with the hurdles that that we all face in construction.
So if you had a client with a big budget who said the real emphasis here is on quality, you would have no qualms about potentially recommending modern methods of construction for that project?
Absolutely not.
Right, great. Brilliant. Well, on that note, let's bring in all of the panel and questions from you, because I don't want to sort of drone on for too long with my questions. So put your hands up. There'll be a roving mic. Hands gone up in the sort of 5th row just here. Great.
Thanks. My name's David Kendall from Optima Projects. I design FRP composite structures, which are almost entirely made in the factory. This includes buildings, bridges, boats, all sorts of things. So my background is very much factory manufacture. So I've always assumed that the construction industry is going to go much more towards off-site construction for all the reasons that sort of Paul and everyone else has highlighted. I just wonder now, just over the last year or so, whether we could actually see that reverse, particularly with things like developments of 3D printing, and we've seen some small buildings produced by 3D printing. In my composites industry, we are beginning to look at methods of 3D printing for automated manufacture. And could we actually see the complete reversal, where we deliver to a construction site robots, raw materials, and they build a house, a building? So it could go completely the other way.
Well, we're pretty much there already, although the robots don't go to site, they stay in our factories. So we have robotic assembly within a factory environment. I mean, you'll be very familiar with that. But we have a nice project where we bought a GRC business. We drove some innovation around some robotic machining of a wax-based molding technology that we created to allow us to create bespoke three-dimensional shaped GRC panels that we can use in any cladding environment, and the whole thing is robot delivered. So robots are a key part of any manufacturing activity, and it's tough to see the two separate. Whether robots do stuff on site, let's wait and see. We certainly have robots laying bricks in molds. We do our off-site manufactured masonry panels. Why not? We're certainly trialling that.
Lynn, quick follow-up from you. I think you were probably the most sceptical on the panel.
I'm an advocate, but horses for courses, and I think we just need general skills, better skills.
So not just robots?
Well, yeah, I mean, I want a robot in my house, but yeah, they can come to me in their out time. Are they going to pay the wages, though? Are they going to get paid wages? Are they going to pay a pension? But anyway, no, that's another story.
There was an article in The Economist only last week about how will the Exchequer harvest future taxes if there aren't any labourers left.
Exactly.
It was interesting. It was an interesting article. I mean,
And there's also a lot of discussion about, I mean, gosh, it's been going for a while, but how much we like work and what's satisfying. But if we could just bring it back, I didn't talk a lot about retrofit, but I gave an example of retrofit. I've been actually working on energy-sprong prototyping, which is an enveloping of traditional houses. But in the UK, we have a very quirky existing stock. And I would suggest that a lot of us live in leaky Victorian houses. And actually, especially in conservation settings, it's going to be very, very tricky to, although we can use cloud point surveys and BIM and all the rest of it, we still need a level of skills to be able to maintain and upgrade our buildings. And in fact, UK Green Building Council, I think this week, have only just come out and said we need, to be delivering deep retrofit to 25 million homes by 2050. So I'm just not sure the robots are going to be able to do that. So I think we need both.
actually, there's a very good robotic insulation installation business that's just started up that send little bugs into your
I've used that.
floors
Yeah.
to insulate your floors.
But let's hope we all still have a job until the robots completely take
And the
over.
problem is that we can't find enough people to work in construction, so let's not get worried about doing away with the jobs because we can't find enough people to do what we need.
Maybe we'll all get the minimum wage without having to work thing that's going around. Question here at the front.
Just bringing back onto the skills shortage, which you both now mentioned, it was going to be for Lynn originally. How do you think the construction industry can actually go about attracting young people into those sort of traditional roles? Because from what I see, it seems to suffer from want of a better word, a lack of prestige. The apprenticeships are something that you go into if you don't go to university or can't go to university. And that this doesn't really chime with how a lot of young people have been set up to see their place in the world, that they're expected to now go to universities, getting up to, on to 50% of people going there for questionable degrees sometimes. How do you actually bring that back round and saying you would be better off doing this, and there's no shame in it? There is actually prestige in pursuing these sort of jobs.
Sorry, can I, just briefly then, I think we need a national retrofit program that is meaningful and is going to deliver, so on which provides the basis to build on this skills issue. And I think the CITB work, which I've had a sort of preview of, suggests that actually offsite produces some very interesting options for youngsters, and the talk about having technical education back right there, at the centre of what we do, because we still want to do things, not give it all up to robots. Yeah, no, absolutely. Back to basics.
Lucy, Homer, are you finding that people want to come into the industry, young people?
So I think what we need to do is just talk more about what a great industry it is to be in. We've just made 2 films actually for CIOB, which had been designed to go into schools. One on diversity, so attracting more women, but from a diverse background into the industry. And the other one talking about how it's not actually the industry that you think it is. It's not all about sort of muddy boots and sort of spades in the ground. Actually, it's much more sophisticated than that.
But it's in the dry of an MMC factory now.
Could do.
Yeah.
I'm really passionate about construction, and I think people don't realise the opportunities, the breadth of opportunities that there are. That you can be, you can be an architect, but you can also be a cost planner. You can be a planner. You can be a project director. There's a huge range of opportunities, and whatever your skill set, I think that's what we should be talking about. And we've been talking to CIOB, is there something in what the army did sort of 5-10 years ago in terms of these are the breadth of jobs that you can have within the industry, that we should be sort of talking about that? And I think that goes to everybody in this room. It's not just just the contractors, it's everybody in the industry should be talking about how good an industry it is to be in.
Probably got time for one more question. Just over there, sort of third row back, fourth row back. Do we have a mic? Could we wing it over there? Just fourth row back. Wave your hand. Give us a wave. Or maybe you've got shy. Is there someone wanting to ask a question there? Great, thank you.
So my name's Tim Mander. It's a question for Paul, actually. I think it's very interesting how Lang O'Rourke have taken offsite, and I think moving construction into a manufacturing process seems to be definitely the way forward. I don't doubt that. I mean, it's just interesting as we move towards, with what Simon's saying about moving towards more sustainable, where we're starting to measure carbon a lot more in our analysis, then, I mean, one does question there are great benefits of kind of CLT in the timber industry, and yet kind of Lang O'Rourke are obviously pushing it towards the concrete industry, and I just wonder, Paul, whether you should be thinking about moving into the timber as opposed to pushing on with concrete.
Good question. Thank you. And I think this plays to one of the very early things we talked about, that ultimately this is about a mix of solutions. And contrary to popular opinion or the passion of the founder of my business, concrete isn't the only thing that we do. And to maybe wrap up a few answers to a number of the points that were raised throughout the last 20 minutes. British Land just sold the Leadenhall building last week for £1.25 billion. They've not done too badly off a steel frame building, which we as Lang O'Rourke constructed for them, a completely redesigned approach that was 85% by value constructed off-site. Roger Stirk Harbour, the architect, so there's no question that you can't deliver superb, high-quality aesthetic solutions that use materials other than just concrete. So I think it's about a mix, and it plays to the skills agenda as well. There's a mix. I've no doubt we can attract younger people into a more exciting manufacturing environment than putting them in the rain on a job site. We need to reduce the demand so that the supply that we have to pump all of our efforts into creating can match that reduced demand, because at the moment they're just miles apart. And as for the idea of quality, we're just finishing off a 40-storey market residential project in central London with Allies and Morrison. Graham Morrison likes the quality of the product so much he bought an apartment there himself. So people are voting with their feet. So the quality piece, I think, is undeniable. But Tim, to your question, it's about a mix of solutions, and it isn't one size fits all, for sure.
Simon Sturgis?
Yes, I'd agree with that last comment about it's a mix of solutions. I think that certainly from a low carbon perspective, you can't presuppose anything. In certain circumstances, concrete is actually quite a good solution because it is incredibly durable. It lasts a long time. I was talking to somebody just earlier on who had a 30-storey building, and they put 11 stories on top of a 30-storey concrete frame. So they'd reused an entire structure. Now, had that been a timber frame, it may not have been quite so, may not have had the capacity to do that. So I think it is very much a question of horses for courses, if you like. I just wanted to make a point about the gentleman there about 3D printing and so on, and also your point about skills. I think that there's a massive shortage of engineers, as we know, in this country. And I think if people aim high and aim for that kind of upskilling, that is so important, because it will pay benefits in off-site fabrication, the design. And I think we have a long way to go in terms of the smart fabrication. 3D printing was mentioned, but there's also self-assembly. There's all sorts of issues that I think we're only just touching at the beginning. So I think there's a massively interesting future for off-site fabrication.
Alan Shingler, quick final thought from you.
Well, just in relation to that last question, the point I'd probably make is that as a designer, as an architect, and people that work in construction, it's nice to have a catalogue of options that you can apply, but it's important that you choose the right solution to the building that you're designing. So CLT, for example, I think we've delivered now 4 schools in CLT, because we can expose the surface, we can perforate it, deal with the acoustics, and we don't have to pay to dry line the finish, so you get some cost efficiencies, and you can build it quickly. We've got an 8-storey CLT residential development where we're not able to benefit from those same cost. We're having to line the walls because of spread of flame, and we haven't got the benefit of time because we can't sell, because we've got this whole conundrum between releasing them for sales values rather than releasing them to the market as soon as possible. So we like the product. I think many people do, but I don't think you can impose any one solution on any type of problem. It's assessing which one is right for each condition.
Thank you very much to our panelists. It was very interesting and stimulating discussion. We're back in 10 minutes to have a Dragon's Den style innovation pitch, so hope to see you then. Thank you.